Today is Tuesday, the 19th of September, 2017. It is block height 486,064. Here for another episode of Block Digest. We are joined today in our lovely panel with Shinobe.
Yo!
Yo, yo. Rick, we got you on face, man. Come on. Show us your face, Rick.
Hey, what's going on, everybody?
There he is. Amazing. And then we have Acnix 2.0, aka Scam. How many names you want, man? Just say something. Okay, he's left us.
Oh,
Fine.
no, he scammed us.
He scammed us. It was a famous exit scam of Acnix. Janine, say hello.
Hi, everyone.
Cool. Well, what have we got today? Is anything going on today? It's been a big news day today. I hear that China is banned leaving China. Should we go
They're
to
just
it?
banning everything nowadays.
Just banning everything. I did predict this. Humble brag. Well, it isn't really bragging if it's the truth, is it? I mean, I did say that China was going on another banning spree. They just want to ban everything. How many headlines do you reckon they can get out of this? So we weren't really sure about the authenticity of this story at first. We did have to kind of go through it. Of course, there is, you know, a Chinese translation that needs to be made in order to vet these things. And normally they just cite sources. Sources have said that certain executives related to crypto exchanges may have to stay in the country to finish up their affairs with the regulations that we have been talking about over the last few days, which means that they won't be able to leave. What do you think of it, Shinobi? Is it fake news?
I mean, it's very indirectly confirmed. It's the Australia's Financial Review is claiming they got this confirmed through a source close to Huobi. So, I mean, I'm going to tentatively say this has a lot of weight behind it, and it makes a lot of sense to me. But obviously, the past 2 weeks or so, there's been a lot of uncertainty as all of this is progressively moving forward. But, you know, it really does make sense. I mean, this seems like the result of a lot of kind of back channel discussions just finally coming to an agreement out of nowhere, and then moves starting to be made forward. And I mean, because I initially, you know, even just a few days ago, I was thinking this wouldn't be that big of an issue. We might just see some hash rate drop off and longer confirmation times while miners are moving equipment out of the country. I know Bitmain already has some of their farms located in Mongolia, and obviously a lot of the exchanges had subsidiary companies in Hong Kong. But if they're effectively issuing a travel ban for any big company heads, they see that not extending to the actual hardware. Like if they're not going to let these company leaders leave the company, why would they let them start shipping their hardware out of country?
Well, I think it just sounds like that these so-called informed sources are just saying that the executives have to stay around during the cleanup period, right? It's just so that they make sure that they do all the business and carry out all the regulatory requirements. And I don't think we made too much mention of it on the show, but it did come up in the Bitcoin Mumble chat, link in the description below, that essentially what China is doing is saying, we see there's a lot of money in this and we want a part of that, right? So now if you want a seat at the table, you're gonna have to pony up. You're gonna have to pay us to be able to trade the stuff, get a license from us. That's regulatory capture. That's great for the exchanges because it means that they don't have any competition. In order to compete with them, you have to have a license too. That means paying a fee. Well, these exchanges already pay the fee because they've made a fortune in all of the trading activity they've had over the last few years, completely unfettered. So I think it's a win-win for both the exchanges and for the government of China.
Well, I mean, where the exchanges are concerned, I totally agree. But that would really just kind of translate to them being pushed out of being part of the global pricing mechanism. But they, like, if over-the-counter trading isn't banned, they would still be able to actually trade and utilize the asset. But I'm much more worried about where this is going in terms of mining, because we've already seen, again, the leaked documents suggesting they're filtering the Great Firewall, and they're actually going as far as potentially applying deep learning as well as packet fingerprinting to block all Bitcoin traffic. That in itself could lead to a network partition if somebody's not able to maintain a link in and out of China. And it's just like there's way too much hash power concentrated in China, that if the government really decides to go far enough with this, I mean, they could potentially cause a network partition and just wait out the difficulty drop and then have enough hash power to just wreak havoc on the chain that the rest of the world is connected to, or potentially seize equipment and start instituting blacklists for things. And like, I'm not so much worried about the exchange aspect of this, but just how far they're going to push it when it comes to mining.
And to talk about mining with us today, we're joined by Blake Anderson.
Thank you for the kind introduction. I just wanted to jump in and say that I liked your use of the terms regulatory capture, because I think that that really starts to put us in a direction in which we can start to understand China's motivation and their purpose here. Traditionally, China and India were hoarding a lot of gold. They wanted to make sure that they were in a good position in terms of gold. And then I think now in the kind of the early versions of the future here, they've realized that Bitcoin in getting as much of that under their control as possible is a better way to go. So with the angle of regulatory capture, if people aren't familiar with it, that's the idea that kind of when exchanges are regulated, the first things bought and sold are those regulators, who then turn around and engage in capture to assist the people that they're supposed to be regulating in quashing competition out of the market, and then gaining those customers. They're going to work in their interest instead of in the interest of the people that they're supposed to keep safe. And that's one of the major problems that happens when you try to regulate an economy beyond just preserving negative rights. So that type of stuff coming from China, and this type of story that we're seeing is very much what a libertarian would expect, but it's also almost shocking to see it coming out and playing out in real time here.
Yeah, indeed. So with the story with the Bitcoin mining potentially being closed, do you want to go into more detail with that? Anyone?
Well, I think that there's been a little bit of chatter on Twitter in terms of if we look at this specifically from the frame of the New York agreement and how much power the New York agreement is trying to count on in terms of splitting the 2x coming from China. That's kind of the biggest thing right now that people are looking for. How is this going to materially affect the New York agreement in terms of how is China going to behave, and what can we predict from that?
Because a lot of those miners that are signaling for NYA are actually situated in China. Is that correct?
Correct.
That could get interesting, Shinobe. And also Acnix as well as with us. Just join us.
Mm-hmm.
How's your sound there, Acnix? You're muted.
I think it's working now. How do I sound?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. We can hear you.
All right, cool.
I love it. On the road, completely off the grid with your RV in the background. That's a good image.
Living the dream.
Yeah, it's working. It's working great.
Living off Bitcoin. So
yeah, real quick though.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it's Aleph was actually talking about satellite links to maybe try to prevent a network partition or Chinese miners being closed out. And the thing with that is, like, they could just simply get an uplink through an internet service provider, but that would potentially have a lot of implications for the latency in the network, because obviously that's incredibly important for a miner's profitability, and there's no real guarantee the uplink or the downlink just through a conventional satellite ISP as to how well connected that would be to the Bitcoin network. And now Blockstream's satellite feed is hooked directly into the fiber relay network, so that's going to have very low latency. But one, the satellite downstream for Asia isn't active yet, and two, I'm not really certain how actually directly uplinking into that from an uplink point of view would work. So they might have to, on that end, just go and detrimental to their profitability.
They might have to on their end do what? Just repeat the last couple words that you said, because you had a big burp in your connection.
The latency implications of a satellite link would probably affect their profitability very much.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, Shinobe, about this, because I wonder, like, how much mining could they really possibly shut down? Like, you know, because I know a bunch of it is way out there in the countryside that's going to be hard to get to. And, you know, doesn't this do a net positive in the long term as far as decentralizing the mining outside of China?
Well, I mean, that's kind of I mean, I'm mostly just going to be going off anecdotal experience here, talking to a few people I know. But we obviously have at least 4 or 5 major farms that I know of, but I'm not exactly sure about the total percentages of the network hash rates involved there. But there also is a lot of the smaller mining operations, like obviously, like, families just looking to make money. And I know one of the industries in China that's really been being displaced by Bitcoin mining is actually illegal aluminum smelting, which is something that a lot of people would do with excess power they had access to. And in a way, it's ironic because you have people screaming about the environmental consequences of proof of work. But in China, at least, people are starting to move away from things like metal smelting, which is horrible for their environment, into Bitcoin mining as an alternative way to make income. So that's actually a net positive in the end. Ultimately, Alex Bergeron, I think the PR contractor for Blockstream, actually wrote a piece on this. I'll have to dig up so we can give you the link. But this is really going to put to test something he thinks, and something I think I mostly agree with him on, that even inside of China, if you can really have mining decentralized just in that smaller environment instead of concentrated in these big corporate farms, then even that would make it much harder for the government to actually do something about, because it's no longer just the few big registered farms they'd have to go after. It would be literally billions, or almost a billion people they would have to like dive through and see who's doing what where. And you could really get a decent amount of censorship resistance in terms of mining being free from government control if we actually see things play out that way in the longer term.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that, Ben. Because yeah, it's still all playing out, and I'm just curious as to how it's going to play out in the long term. Because I know short term the market reacts, and I just think long term we're going to see this show Bitcoin's robustness as a system. Hopefully, we'll continue to see that.
Mm-hmm. Because I mean, like the aluminum smelting, it's actually in this article I was just talking about. I think is like 1/3 or 2/3. I kind of forget. It's been a while since I read it, of the total output of refined metal from China, and they're actively attempting to stamp out these illegal smelting operations. So even with a different good like that in a concerted effort to try to prevent people from doing it, it's still a gigantic portion of the economic output in that market in China.
Right. Anyone else? This is going to be a story that just writes itself and goes on and on and on for weeks. We'll still be talking about it at the end of October, I predict. But yeah,
it's a good question, a good issue. I mean, I think that the only other thing that could be said is, yeah, if there's big centralized farms that get busted up by the Chinese government, I mean, it's not the best to have the Chinese government coming in with violence, but at the same time, there might be a decentralization effect, which will be nice. Other than that, there's about a 0.08 cent kilowatt hour cost for power in China. So that's pretty competitive with the rest of the world. So I think there'll also be a lot of decentralized or smaller mining operations that would be able to be run there that wouldn't be able to run elsewhere because the power is too expensive. So it's kind of a mix of the people that are professionally doing the big Bitcoin mining, and then also people, if they want to mine individually, China's not the worst place to do it.
Indeed. And shall we move from China to Russia? And if anyone remembers Vinnik, Alexander Vinnik, who was accused of being involved in the BTCE money laundering, well, apparently now Moscow is trying to seek custody of this guy. So it's probably going to be a battle between the US authorities and Russia in terms of who gets him. And it sounds like he's not actually wanted for the charges in Russia are probably less severe than the ones that he's wanted for in the US. And it's not clear that the Russian authorities will then hand him over. He's currently in Greece. Anyone see the story?
Yeah, actually, I saw that mentioned, but I didn't really have any time to really catch up on it. But I think it is kind of encouraging, showing that there is still kind of disagreements in the background and little infighting as far as international cooperation to move against crypto is.
Yeah, I thought it was like, I just find it kind of interesting. I just want to try and find one of the images of him here. because I want to remind everyone of what he looks like. But what about these shirts, though? I mean, that is an epic photo. What is this guy wearing on the left of the picture? Like, he's supposed to be a cop.
Comeback, man.
That is
like
an t-shirt combo.
Hey, I don't see one badge or anything, just some badasses.
Yeah, those are some really plainclothes police officers right there. This has absolutely nothing to do with the story, but does affect the gentleman that is currently in Greece still and is awaiting extradition. And he's wanted on lots of very serious charges in the US, but it sounds like Moscow are going to have a little go for him as well. And also links us quite neatly into this other story where Putin orders the end of trade in US dollars in Russian seaports. So from now on, everyone's going to have to just trade the rubles in the seaports in a sort of, I don't know, like a weak attempt to undermine the global reserve currency. I don't know how much impact is this going to have. I mean, don't these seaports like freeze over? They don't have any warm seaports, do they?
I mean, I think it's I think it's the strongest way to try to undermine the global reserve currency. When this happened with Saddam and Gaddafi and all that, whether it be trading oil for euros like Saddam did, or Gaddafi trying to fundamentally change the way that value works. These things are like the tectonic plates shifting in terms of like the way things are going to be. Shinobe, I'll let you jump in, and then I'm going to probably pile onto what you said here.
Well, I don't think it's really about like how much of an immediate impact it can have. It's showing that this trend is still progressively moving forward. Because like Blake just said, before Gaddafi was knocked out of power, he was a very cruel leader in his own country. But when it came to Africa in the larger context, he was a huge philanthropist, and was engaged in a lot of efforts to try to uplift some of the worst parts from Africa and actually establish an equivalent of like the euro for Africa. And it's just these desires to move away from the homogeny of the US dollar and the United States having such a controlling influence in global trade. It's still moving forward. Even when you had a leader making huge strides and attempting that, just completely removed from power and that program derailed, other political entities that desire to move in that direction are still moving in that direction. They're not backing down because the U.S. prevented any individual trying to accomplish something like that.
And the global reserve currency gives the United States like special powers. Like we can carry a debt to GDP ratio that's well beyond what we should normally be able to carry because we are the world reserve currency. So it's not meaningless when Russia does this in terms of total trade and what's going to be the material impact immediately. That might not be the most significant, but as this type of trend continues to catch on, if it does, I mean, that would be very damaging to the ability of a central authority to be able to, run roughshod over the world. So it might be costly for Russia to do this, but I kind of understand the desire for these countries to not be in the position that they are. I mean, like Libya wasn't perfect, Gaddafi wasn't perfect, but I mean, if you just look at the literacy rate of his, area of jurisdiction, like during the time of his rule and stuff like that, I mean, it's not as black and white as the U.S. said it was. Literacy rates increased a lot.
Mm-hmm. And that's like, it's one of the things that like I see a lot of Americans, really kind of struggle with acknowledging. The world isn't as black and white, good and bad with that stark line in the middle as we like to think about it. We like as Americans, like it's so common to just look at ourselves as beyond reproach or the champions for some noble cause, whereas like nobody else can hold that torch or play that role. And it really is like, it comes down to like, nobody is entirely good or evil, and nobody does solely good or solely bad in the world. It's always a mix of the two. And it's just what you want to pay. Yeah, it's what you want to pay more attention on or put more emphasis to.
Janine, do you have more specifics about the story?
No, I was actually going to go into the WikiLeaks release about the Russian surveillance system that came out today, because I thought that was kind of, it was really interesting in relation to all the other things that Russia is announcing today.
I think it's a good segue.
Dive on
Shinobi,
in.
did you have anything else?
No, take the handle, Jimmy.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so another big news about Russia. Today, WikiLeaks released over 200 documents as part of their Spy Files series, which is a collection of documents about surveillance contractors from all over the world. But specifically today, it's about Russia. And these documents are from as early as 2007. And as with most of the spy files that WikiLeaks has released, it gives detail about cooperation between the intelligence sector in Russia and the military-industrial complex, as well as the private sector, which the technologically private sector that develops these surveillance technologies. And what is highlighted in this release in particular is Peter Service, which is I'm assuming that's how you pronounce it. It might have a different pronunciation, but it's a Russian company that supplies this kind of surveillance software, including tools for IP traffic analysis, deep packet inspection, mobile communications capture, and just big data analysis in general. And WikiLeaks points out that the presentation for the deep packet inspection tool in particular was actually written just a few months after Edward Snowden disclosed that the NSA mass surveillance program and how it was cooperating with private US IT corporations such as Google and Facebook. And also, to quote from the WikiLeaks release, as a matter of fact, Peter Service is uniquely placed as a surveillance partner due to the remarkable visibility their products provided into the data of Russian subscribers of mobile operators, which exposed to Peter Service valuable metadata, including phone and message records, device identifiers, network identifiers, cell tower information, and much more. This enriched and aggregated metadata is, of course, of interest to Russian authorities, whose access became a core component of the system architecture. And I just want to remind everyone that, one of the most famous quotes to come out of the Snowden revelations was, I think it was Michael Hayden. I'm not sure. I might be mixing them up. But it was a famous quote about how, agencies like the NSA and the CIA, they use metadata, they kill people based on metadata. And so obviously that was to get the point across that metadata can be very revealing. Like right now they're trying to go through a campaign where they're saying, oh, it's just metadata. It's not a big deal. It's not content. Well, actually metadata is very revealing. And so that should never be underplayed. And so obviously if they have all this aggregated metadata, they're probably getting a lot of information out of that about Russian citizens. And as you can probably guess, what is particularly disturbing about Russia in this case is that in 2016, they passed a pair of federal counterterrorism laws, which not only expanded the power of Russian law enforcement to perform mass surveillance and force the telecommunications industry to add backdoors into their systems, but it, quote, makes no distinction between lawful interception and mass surveillance by state intelligence authorities without court orders. So yeah, I found that quite interesting. I haven't gone through all the documents, but I thought that it was kind of weird that the release came on the same day that Russia was announcing that it wouldn't allow trading of the US dollar anymore.
Very interesting.
Yeah, this is one of the quotes that you can get an insight into how important metadata is. The EFF of well known for this. They know you rang a phone sex line at 2:24 a.m. and spoke for 18 minutes, but they don't know what you talked about. They know you called a suicide prevention hotline from the Golden Gate Bridge, but the topic of the call remains a secret, and so on and so on. So I'll post this in the description below. I've also put for the end of the show, it will appear. The Shinobe mentioned the mining thing as well. I'll pop that in there so you guys can go read up on it. Did anyone have any thoughts on this?
Well, I was just going to comment on what you said. I always think that, it's secret unless they do an additional audit. Like when they say secret, it means compartmentalized in my estimation.
Yeah, the metadata is like a map, where as long as you actually have that raw data stored somewhere, you can use the metadata in order to kind of sift through what you actually want to spend the time analyzing as far as the full data.
Yeah, indeed. I think the metadata is actually in some ways becoming more important than the primary data itself, because you need that map in order to find it when you've got such a growing amount of primary data, right? The bigger that data gets, the more important the map becomes.
Well, and it becomes a really risky part in terms of like technologically empowered collectivism. We want to have technologically empowered existentialism. We want to have technologically empowered human spirit. We don't want to have a few people with the effort and efficacy of technology to run roughshod over everybody else and to be able to spy on everybody.
We need technologically empowered existentialism.
Yeah, we
Too
do.
many
We need
big
technologically empowered
It's a lot of polysyllabic words in there, mate. You're going to have to unpack that for us and just dumb it down. High five. Just dial it back a bit.
We got to keep humans in the loop, man. I mean, it's like the worst thing that we can do is have technologically empowered collectivism where we have all of these systems and all of these tools that are used to scan and see everything that's going on. Then we have selectively enforced laws and tyranny, and that's really, really bad. If we could have governance that we all agree on and that we have, you know, negative rights preserved, people are like, yeah, put a whole bunch of scanners and information finders everywhere because it'll make my life better and better. But now that's not the case. People don't want to have all that stuff in their house because the government's insane.
Wow. But remember to breathe, man. Remember to breathe. I thought we were just trying to automate communism. I thought the plan was, okay, Soviet Russia didn't really work out, but that was really a flaw of the humans. If we're going to take the humans out of the mix and put computers in there instead of the bureaucrats, everything would be great and we'd be living in utopia right now.
Yeah, we just need the Peter Joseph giant robot to tell us exactly how we need to perfectly instantiate things that are anti-human. It'll just get better and better.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
Blake, I do want you to define for our audience what is negative rights, because you've used the term a few times. So you used it twice on the show and you used it once on the other show.
Oh, definitely. The difference between negative and positive rights is extremely material right now, especially as we go into the future, because people don't really talk about liberties versus entitlements or negative rights versus positive rights. And it's easy to understand why. It's like all these words sound really boring and hard to remember, and they don't really seem to have a lot of weight or value in terms of what we're doing. But negative rights are just rights that you have that oblige only inaction on the part of somebody else. Like your right to life is your negative right to life. All that people have to do to respect your right to life is to not come and kill you. And so we can all agree that negative rights are pretty precious to us. Anything that includes your right to survive and that set of rights, that's very specific and very, very important. So negative rights are things that oblige inaction on behalf of others. And then positive rights are things wherein you are owed something or somebody has to do something. Like, let's say like health insurance would be a positive right. It's actually creating something where somebody or something has to do something more than nothing and able to serve you this right that you have. And what we've kind of lost track of is that positive and negative rights, the difference between them needs to be enshrined in contract law in terms of positive rights. If you have a positive right, there needs to be tenable contract law, and that's how it needs to work. Contract law being a giant portion of our judicial system at one point, which is the way that it should be. Now people are saying, well, no, we can have positive rights. We can have the right to healthcare. We can have the right to manipulate and control every level of commerce. And that is becoming the way that the future is failing. The inability to discern negative and positive rights and the desire to engage in regulatory capture because you're going to nerf reality and you're going to say, I don't want to argue from first principles and examine negative and positive rights and where they come through and actually make sense in computer science. We want to nerf reality and make everything special. And then we're going to have everything left to this remainder of debt or whatever you call it, leading up to violence. And that's kind of the solution that the current technological change needs to tackle. We need to move away from this unaccountability into areas where we have very, very clear, specific descriptions of the difference between liberties and entitlements, because if we don't figure that out, the future is going to be very, very, very ugly.
Right. So in summary, negative rights are things like, fantastic explanation, by the way. Negative rights would be things like my right to breathe in fresh air, my right to have access to water, that kind of thing. Negative rights, i.e., things that I would have absent of anybody else. Positive rights are things like my right to earn money, or my right, to be an entrepreneur or to do things. Like if somebody's living downstream on water and somebody further upstream puts a dam in it, starts bottling it, selling it to them. The first group of people have the negative right to the water. The people upstream have the positive right to sell it to them.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's situations in which if you want a positive right to be enacted, you go and you make a voluntary deal with somebody else. They cannot be done without certain things that we have that are axioms of contract law, like mutual assent or meeting of the minds. A contract that you make with somebody is not okay if it's made through duress or lack of meeting of the minds. So it's an interesting example that you gave in terms of water and who has water and where is your right to access water versus where is your right to go purchase water and have somebody not get in the way of that. So it's almost kind of a confusing example because it gets so close to things that we really, really need. A better example would be, sand or something less valuable than water because it gets less.
You guys have vocabularies that are too big. Let me try.
Yeah, let's see. Let's dumb it down. Let's dumb it down. Dial it back.
A negative right is pretty much the right to not have somebody else fuck with you.
Correct.
So as long as you are not fucking with somebody else, that you should have the right for everybody to not impede you. Whereas a positive right is like an entitlement to something from somebody else, where they would be forced to take a positive action to provide something for you, otherwise risk a punitive reaction to that.
Very good, Shinobe.
Like if somebody has a candy bar, you have a right to go and make a deal with them, but they have no obligation to provide you with a candy bar. Whereas if an individual is being arrested by a policeman and they say, you're going to be arrested, if you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided to you. It's a positive right that comes about as a result of the situation between you and the policeman who's taking away your freedom. They can't do that without giving you the positive right of fair representation and things like that. It can get a little bit muddled, but understanding the basic definitions between entitlements and liberties is really important, and a lot of people have lost sight of it, I think.
Very good. Very good. Right. Aknix, are you ready?
Yeah, what's up?
Well, I want you to tell us about Slack because you gave us a great monologue earlier on the Bitcoin Mumble chat about this. They've raised they're valued at $5 billion, and they've just got this investment from this Japanese bank, SoftBank, $250 million. And they're actually saying in this article that they're not even planning on spending it. This is money that is keeping back. And we were talking about the fact that, this is basically a bubblegum UI for IRC. The chat technology has existed for a long time, but essentially you were comparing it to ransomware, like actual Slack software, comparing it to ransomware. You say a little bit more for us?
Yeah, so you're putting all your data in this thing, and at a certain point, it amasses so much data that the data source becomes valuable. Now it's a data store, and it's for sale. So this entity that used to own it, that you essentially entrusted your data to, now may sell out to another company. Then someone else is going to have access potentially to all of your data. So now you're in a bidding war to protect your data. And how many companies have put proprietary information and such into Slack? Who gets access to that? So yeah, that's why I see it as malware.
I found this article on how you can actually export the full history of your Slack channel, i.e. not just the 10,000 messages and above. And there is an explanation in the description below to levels.io. And he actually talks about in this article how he had a Slack channel, this gentleman here that wrote this, of 4,000 people. And it would have cost him $720,000 a year in order to pay for it, right? But they're this big community. And then when he went to export it, what he actually found was this screen grab up here. He had all these JSON files in these various folders. It didn't export the images. It replaced the usernames with user IDs. It replaced the actual channel names with channel IDs. And this is the problem, is that it's a bait and switch. It's a classic bait and switch. They get you in, they get you hooked on the bubblegum UI crack lolly. And then it's like, well, you want to access your archives, the data that you produced, your own content, your own words that came out of your brain and into the keyboard. Oh, you're going to have to pay for that. It's like, why?
Yeah, it's insane.
Like, that just feels it feels like a hijacking. And especially when you, as you point out, this is proprietary data. Now, when questioned about, the product, the founders often of Slack talk about how it's a challenger to email. And the email is broken. Now, this is how it all starts. That they start off with a problem statement, right? Email's broken. Just tell everyone something that they can relate to. And, oh yeah, email is terrible. I'm terrible at getting back to emails. And they talk about how email works well between companies, but it works terribly inside of companies because everyone's got these little inbox silos. And when you first join up to a company, your inbox is empty. You can't see the history. But really what we needed was IRC. But IRC looks terrible and it's got crappy usability. So we just stuck a nice bubblegum UI on it. We made you sign up through our servers and give us your email. And now we get all of that data and it becomes a honeypot, not just the primary data, but also all the metadata as well, your login times and your various devices. Maybe you log in through your phone and they get some extra metadata from that as well. And I find it really evil. I'm finding the number of chat rooms that I can log into now without exposing myself and doxing myself, giving my phone number or something, to be diminishing at an alarming rate.
Yeah, it's a problem. And it's what's the next platform to do this? You know, how many others are there in line after Slack? Makes you think about Discourse and these other ones. You know, what are they going to do? And then when we're talking about multimedia data, you know, it just gets more interesting, right? And
I mean, yeah, who owns all those Pepe memes in those Slack channels?
Parody is fair use.
No, I'm just saying, dude. I'm just saying. I didn't say it's not fair use. I'm just saying that, you know, who owns those? Does Slack own all your Pepe memes?
Well, I wanted to circle back to Rick. I think Rick had an interesting idea of in terms of what might be a motivating driver for some of this.
Yeah, man, I really think it's interesting that right there in the article, it talks about how the guy who invested $250 million from Japan went to go meet with Trump, and his meeting was to discuss $1 billion in investments in startups. And Slack's a really, you know, that is the startup meeting place where people work on information. It'd be a great backdoor way to see all the, you know, developments in these startups and which ones to invest in. And it really just does kind of show that, like, you know, these guys that have the means and power to go to these places with this data, they have access to it if they got the price. You know, it's sad, but I could see this data being used for, you know, it's going to be investments in the future for this guy is the way I see it happening.
If you don't know what the product is, the product is you. And it's interesting, like, to think about that. Again, I know I keep saying the age of information, but it really is. It's the age of information, the scarce resource is attention. You can get way more information than you can ever know what to do with now. And so these curated information spots are like the honeypots of honeypots. And so I think that you got to be careful with Slack and all this stuff. Like, am I saying that Slack is totally unsecure and they're going to take your data and your IP right now and you'll have no recourse? No, of course I'm not saying that. But at the same time, you have to look at the alignment of incentives that go into a system and be like, whoa, there's a red flag coming up here.
Well, the thing that
also,
you go ahead now.
AI needs data sets, right? You need to train AI. Like, what better data set can you get than chat logs, right? Like, I just thought of that.
Yeah, that's very true. And yeah, I think one of the things that it concerns me is how much in the crypto community we've come to depend on Slack, and it's a big point of centralization. I think there've been a few hacks, like in the basic attention token one. Slack channel was compromised, and what you can do when you can like masquerade as other users, like just by hacking their accounts. And that's not to say anything wrong with Slack's security per se, but that individual user's security, right? Because Slack is a proprietary organization. It's got a black box. You don't know what's going on inside of there, and therefore you're relying on that other person having really, really good security. And if that person's got lousy security and you're getting all your information from the Slack channel about some scammy ICO, I don't know, whatever, and you've actually got money on the line, it becomes a serious problem. And I think all that intellectual property that's being put on there, I mean, if Slack were hacked by a hacker group and there was like a big doxing event and some big blob file was uploaded somewhere on the darknet and everyone could see inside of competitors' chats and shit, I just to say nothing negative about Slack themselves, I still feel like that's a huge point of centralization.
Yeah. I mean, it really is, like, data is the fuel that is going to make the economy work this century. And people are just being way too naive and short-sighted in how they manage their supply of that. Like, it's like people are watching OPEC be built up right in front of them with the opportunity to prevent it. And they're just going, whatever. Okay. Like, that's not important.
Yeah, but I don't think data is the real oil. I think the algorithms are the oil. I think what should happen, hopefully, eventually, is that everyone will have the algorithms to analyze their own data. And it won't really be about, having it locked up in these corporations. Eventually, information does disperse. And I think eventually even programming itself and a lot of these algorithms will be democratized. And, just like we saw with Skype and all these other VoIP competitors that came along, I think eventually more and more people will get into the game. It will get more competitive, and so hopefully that would be my hope. I mean, you're telling the story that I hope won't happen.
Data's like the new water. Data's like the new water, where it being tainted isn't necessarily filth. It's about access. Who has access, or who can you guarantee does or doesn't have access? So if we think about data almost in the new age of information as like potable water, we need to filter it out. We need to curate it. We need to make it better and better. And there's certain things that you can look at in terms of how a company runs. You can be like, look, their data / water is going to get muddy or have a huge conflict of interest eventually, and it's not going to be as pure. And I think that that's a very, very clever way of looking into the future in terms of how our value proposition is going to interact. A lot of it's going to have to do with data, contextualization, availability, and things like that.
I think Chris makes like a good point though, because like, you know, I used to be the biggest Google fanboy, but they have been nothing but just complete shit lately and are doing things I can only summarize as completely immoral and unethical. But one of the things they are doing is with their deep learning, with their algorithms for things, is they're open sourcing most of that. And they really are like just laying out the brain that sifts through and pulls all the value from that information out for everybody's use. So as the natural process unfolds of information, like just spreading itself out widely, like that central tool to really draw value from it is already being put out there pretty openly.
Yeah, I mean, it's democratization of the algorithms, right?
Yeah, I think so. Janine, did you want to say something? You had this tweet from earlier.
Yeah, so because Shinobe, you were bringing up Google, and I thought it was really funny recently because at the end of 2015, Google was saying that they're going to start using machine learning to generate email replies for you, so you wouldn't have to write them. It would just create one, basically scanning your emails, and then it would create a reply based on the situation. Most of them would probably be very general, especially in the early stages with this machine learning algorithm. But I just thought that was funny because it was also at a time when people were angry about Google scanning for targeted advertising. So I made a joke about, you know, Google saying we've scanned your email for years, but we want to like quench your anger. So let's make it useful to you by coming up with general replies to emails because you don't actually want to talk to the people you're emailing or something. So it's like, basically it's like a joke about how, you know, people are participating in this system where they don't even want to talk to these people in this email system, and yet they're still forking all of this data over to Google, who's using it to, you know, monetize their service. And then recently, I think it was 2 months ago, actually no, it was this month. So Google was in a I think it was an arbitration session with people that were angry about the personalized ads thing. And 2 months ago, Google was saying, oh, we're going to turn off the personalized ads. We're not going to scan your emails anymore. And then it turns out, nope, they're going to do that. Like 2 months later, they're like, no, we, as part of our email, our email service, we have to keep scanning and we have to do personalized ads. So yeah, just be aware that every time you use Google, every time you write an email, it's being gathered all together, and then they're going to use it to target ads at you.
Yeah, they really lost
nothing of the cross-device tracking that we'll probably get into, no doubt, on this show at some point.
Well, and ads, I think, are their first pre-pivot move. Once the ads don't work out, they're going to be like, all right, time to sell everything you've ever thought to the highest bidder.
Yeah, man, it really sucks to have this happen too, because I'm of the same opinion as Shinobe. Like, you know, I attribute a lot of my intelligence or learning capability to Google, and now that kind of is something I don't like to, you know, even admit.
Well, don't be a collectivist, man. Just, you know, be thankful for the individuals that did good work at Google and that got value out of the big cluster mess. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Shinobi, sorry, did I cut you off just a minute ago?
Oh no, it was just a quick reply.
All right. Well, okay. Now on to my favorite topic, if we're done with that one, and that is that Pepe the Frog. I mean, the founder's just going to go all out legal on the alt-right.
Is he going to sue the Bitcoin blockchain?
He's going to. I mean, every single crypto Telegram group has Pepe memes that come in waves, usually when the price is going up. And occasionally when the price is going down, except it's normally of him hanging himself or something in front of a red dildo chart in the background. And yeah, they could sue 4chan. Shani is saying in the private chat. Anyone want to pick this one up?
I mean, he's got to know that
is
this is going to have the exact opposite impact as he wants. Like he's going to get so much attention from this, and if he's on, the social justice side, it's going to be that type of attention that'll be positive. So I think that he's just fine with taking people to court over things that are going to be very, very, very thin at best.
But see, that's the funny thing is, like, a meme is essentially a parody of something, and there are a litany of exceptions for free use of material that's copyrighted for the purposes of parody. So once a smart enough lawyer puts that together, like, this is going to get slapped down, I think.
What I particularly liked is that when I tweeted out, look at what came my way. Just Pepe meme after Pepe meme after Pepe meme. I mean, it was just relentless. He is exactly going to get the opposite of what he's trying to do here.
My favorite are the really badly drawn rushed Pepe memes.
Yeah, they have character, don't they?
I think it's really funny because this is a DRM copyright type thing, and he's essentially letting the frogs out. It's like the origin of the meme that is becoming the meme that's, I don't know, it's a self-fulfilling meme.
Yeah, well, there you go. So Matt Fury, founder and the creator of the Feels Good Frog, that was his original name, now wants to sue all the people.
Well, and it's funny too, because if you look into the history of it, he's like, I had the Feels Good Frog, man, and it was a cartoon about a frog that would urinate with his pants around his ankles because it felt good. It's like, that's not in any way similar at all to like what it's been rebranded as. And even if it looks like a little bit similar, it's just funny to me. Like, he's like, that's Pepe, like that's the original Pepe. It's like, maybe to you and like 13 other people, but not to the internet.
Right. That's why I think this is just such a ridiculous story, because it's been out so long and it's copied and pasted everywhere that it just seems absurd to try and put the can back in there, put the worms back in the can. It's just not going to work.
The meme is already online. You can't wrangle a meme. It's like trying to pick up a minefield. Like, oh, I want to go pick up this giant minefield. It's not going to work out.
Right. Go ask Barbara Streisand how that works.
Yeah, like, let's arrest the idea.
Right, what am I showing right here? Shanine, I don't know. I don't get it. You told me to put this screen up.
It's just childhood memories. It's an old American children book series.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'd never, because I don't engage in the Pepe stuff, and so when I saw the memes start to really pop up like a year or two ago, I thought that it was actually from the Frog and the Toad series. I think the actual origin, the author calls it was for a boys club comic or something. But every time I see Pepe, I think back to the Frog and the Toad, and I think, oh, what happened to it?
I think this is a pretty funny story, and I look forward to all the Pepe memes that come out of this legal action. I think it's going to fuel some of the most creative stuff yet. And so finally, South Africa, pick and pay online retailer to accept Bitcoin. What's this about, Shinobe?
It's mostly just a wide store chain in South Africa accepting Bitcoin. But the one thing that irritates the heck out of me is they're using Electrum. So they're effectively using an SPV wallet and letting all of the data regarding their customers leak out to somebody else's server. And like, I'm happy to see another business accept Bitcoin, but as a business, you should be running your own full node, because you are dealing with customer data, with things that can be taken and linked to metadata and completely lay bare the economic activity of people who are purchasing goods and services from you. And I appreciate that this is a new space and there is a very big lack of information out there, but businesses should not be using services like this to accept Bitcoin. They should be running their own node and keeping the amount of information about their customers leaking to an absolute minimum, because this really is different than just a credit card system.
Gavin said I don't have to run a node.
Yeah, that's what Gavin Andreessen said, Shinobi.
And he's the CEO of Bitcoin, so
Yeah,
no,
isn't he
I
like the
threw all my
chief
notes in
chief
the garbage.
scientist. The chief scientist, Blake.
Chief
Get
scientist.
your titles right.
I'm going to sue the Bitcoin company because of him.
But not everyone can afford a $20,000 full node, Shinobe. I mean,
then
how are
piss off.
these? That's perfect. Fackle. It's spelled F-A-C-K. Yeah.
But I mean, that's why it's important, Chris, to like consider the cost of validating things as one of the most important metrics of the network, because you are forced, if you can't afford to validate, to have all of those privacy implications as a business accepting Bitcoin. And that's not every business out there is going to have $20,000 or a couple $1 million to sink into a data center. That is going to emulate, if things are pushed that way, the exact same kind of structure we have with conventional payment systems and all the same flaws dealing with people's private information.
Yeah. Well, the full node that I set up for Dragon's Den was like $19.99 a month or something like that in euros. So it didn't cost me $20,000 to run that.
Something that's pretty affordable. Like even a small like home business could potentially afford that if they're profitable enough.
Well, in my node, like I run a node on my computer. I have an i7 and stuff like that, and the stats of my computer are such that attack that was discovered that can take Bitcoin nodes offline, my main node would be immune to it. So, I mean, there's probably a middle version between, a cheap node and a really expensive node, but saying that you need a minimum of $20,000 to piss off, I mean, that's delicious hyperbole.
Indeed. Okay. Anyone else? Final thoughts?
Pepe did absolutely nothing wrong.
No, he didn't. And the art belongs to everyone now. It's in the public domain. People are going to do with it what the hell they want to do with it. And good luck tracking all those people down on 4chan.
Yeah, right, man. They're going to be running for a long time trying to track that guy down.
Yeah, indeed.
Our chat is talking about religiousness in Bitcoin. I think they fear that we might become a circle jerk into our own black hole. So we have to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah. We should all mention that we are being paid by Blockstream Core right now. And we're basically their shills.
I'm being paid.
Well, you made that awesome.
I'm the guy in the shadows running everything. I get paid in hats.
Well, you made that awesome existentialism quote. What do you think was going to happen? Come on.
I really like this quote that was made by Drem They earlier on, where he said that Google is streamlining their motto to be evil. Just be evil. It's fewer words. It's more economical. Yeah. I like it. And Paula Green's saying that she just outsources all her data to Russia. So she uses Yandex search engine and just like, I trust the Russians with it more than I trust Google with it.
Oh, Paula, getting called out.
Just pick your state. Just pick which one you want when you're on the internet.
I mean, it is. I mean, it's kind of a trade-off because you have a lot of weird laws, and I mean, I've seen that attitude a lot, Paul. That people are more comfortable with Yandex or Russian services, but you have to remember here that the laws are different as far as collecting data based on what country you're talking about and whether the subject is a citizen or not. So simply using another country's services, you might think that's good, but that might get rid of a lot of legal barriers of your own government gathering information indirectly. So it really is a little more complicated and something you should think more on than just Russian services are good.
Yeah, and look, they got their own NSA version, the Peter Piper or whatever it is, so, go figure.
Indeed, be in control of your own data and understand who you're giving it to and what the actual consideration is in that agreement, rather than just handing it off because you've got an immediate desire that needs meeting. So any other final words before we say goodbye? Just want to remind everyone that you can join us on the Bitcoin Mumble. The link is at the top of the description. You can also get a link to all of the wonderful guests on the panel today. And you've been, this has been a really amazing chat. And we got a lot of really good feedback as well after yesterday's show. And so we want to keep that coming. The panels are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I want to thank you all for your time as well, all 70 of you that stayed with us throughout this show for us. So thank you very much. And remember, if you enjoyed it, you can hit the like and subscribe, but only if you want to. Bye for now.